All right, good afternoon, everybody. The International Parking and Mobility Institute presents today's Shop Talk for Municipalities and Transportation Providers, COVID-19, our industry's response. My name is Justin, and I will be assisting Casey Jones, CAPP, in moderating today's Shop Talk. As a reminder, today's Shop Talk is being recorded. We will make the recording available within 48 hours for everyone to use and share. I want to thank everyone that has joined us. I know that these are some unprecedented times and that we're all here today, and that is why we're all here today. Our community has come together to share some best practices to keep everyone safe. Before we get started, I want to introduce IPMI Board Chair Dave Honorato. He would like to say a few words.
And making today's Shop Talk a reality. To reiterate on Justin's comment, these are some unprecedented times and not business as usual for all of us. By working together, communicating, sharing our concerns, issues, and how we are dealing with today's new norm, we will get through this crisis together. IPMI is committed in doing its part by providing and sharing information with our membership and providing forums for you to communicate with us and our peers. Again, I'd like to thank staff for organizing today's Shop Talk, and thank you for your participation, especially during these trying times. Please stay safe and healthy.
Dave, thank you for your inspirational words. Before we start, just a few quick housekeeping rules today. If you have a webcam and you are comfortable doing so, please turn on your cam. IPMI wants everyone to feel engaged and participate, and we want to see your smiling faces. We want this virtual Shop Talk to be just a regular Shop Talk, face-to-face and sharing ideas. As a reminder, all participant lines are muted. We invite everyone to participate. To do so, we ask that everyone raise their hands by using the call button in the participation menu. Online participants can use the raise hand function in the participant menu. Phone participants can press *9 to raise your hand. Once recognized, your mic will be unmuted and allowed to join the conversation. You may also type your question into the chat. Click the chat icon and type your question or comment and click send. I will reiterate the instructions again. Now I'm going to turn over the audience to Casey Jones, CAPP.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks everyone for being here. Before we get going, I want to say just a shout out to a couple of folks that helped put together questions for today. This is a little bit different than we would normally run a Shop Talk, and I know many of you have participated in those before, so we have a set of questions that we're going to work from, and if we make our way through all of those questions, then we'll be able to open the floor up a bit more. But Mike Este, Brett Wood, and Mark Santos were instrumental in putting questions together. So I want to send thanks to them for their help and willingness, as always. I also want to take a moment to thank the IPMI staff, Sean, Rachel, Kim, Cindy, Justin, Kathleen. These folks are working tirelessly. The entire staff of IPMI is working tirelessly to adjust to these unprecedented times and to be able to open up ways in which we can communicate and share information. It's the essence of IPMI, and it's really amazing what these folks are able and willing to do for our community. So thank you all for that. I think it goes without saying, folks, that we're not here to talk about products or services. We're really here to share ideas. We're here to come together, to collaborate, and that is what we're hoping to get out of today. This is not the only time, yes, certainly. And if you can mute your lines, please, that would be fantastic. I know some of you are at home, and most of you are at home, and that's fantastic. You with your families, but if you could mute until we've called on you, that would be most helpful. Thank you. So as many of you know, in a typical Shop Talk, and Justin mentioned this, we're able to go around the room and people will raise hands and join in the conversation. And this will be a little bit different, but I have no doubt that this will be successful. So if you wouldn't mind just if you've got something to share, raising your hand on the participant panel, that's how we'll manage this. And when we shift topics, what we'll do is we'll clear out all of those raised hands and we'll start over again, okay? I want to have as much participation here as possible, but we've got an hour to work with today. So we'll do our level best to get as many people engaged, as many comments and what they'd like to share with the group, and we'll see how this goes. Okay. So thank you for bearing with us all as we try things that are new. So let's start with this. Let's talk about people management. Maybe that's undoubtedly our most important asset is the folks that we work with. Let me open up the questions here with how are we managing our staff right now? Many of us are using a combination of office and field staff. Some are, or maybe most of the folks are working from home. Is that true for you? And how is it that you're managing your folks from perhaps afar, both the people that are at home and people that are in the field?
Hey, Casey, this is Aaron Quisenberry with the University of Kansas. Yeah, KU's been shut down on campus. Online classes will start, like a lot of other folks, probably next week. We have a unique relationship with our bus provider where the city bus routes are still running, but because KU has closed campus, the KU portion of routes are closed. All of our parking and transit staff are working from home. We had a few folks go into the campus and do some things early on, but other than that, we're working remotely. And shoot, it seems like I've got 5 webinars or 5 Zoom calls a day or something. A couple of them are with our bus providers, trying to still figure out what kind of level of service we're offering to the city. We're on phone calls with Douglas County emergency management folks, wondering if any day they're just going to say, shut your bus service down for the city. So working remotely, I guess, is a short answer, but still seems like almost kind of seems like I'm a little busier in a sense that there's just so many different dynamics with phone calls and trying to get information out to folks going on. So that's quick skinny.
Wow, thank you for that. It really feels to me like what you're doing is over communicating. You're doing 5 conference calls a day. That's fantastic. Appreciate that. Mike Este.
Hi. So similarly, I have a handful of staff who are office staff, probably a dozen, and then I have probably a dozen field staff. So the office staff, we're in week 3 of telecommuting, and it's really about, like you said, Casey, over communicating with folks. We're keeping all of our one-on-ones. I have a daily check-in call with all of my folks. I think people have really appreciated maintaining some sort of human connection and touch. So that's all gone well, and I'm sure everybody has mastered all of their various tools for teleworking by now. We'd like to say exercising some new muscles. On the field side, it's been more challenging because they don't have an option to telecommute, and we just got a stay work order from our governor last night. So we are, in real time as everybody else is, working through what does it look like to maintain assets with a skeleton crew, what's essential work. And a lot of that is in combination with our city's, incident management team, emergency operations center, to make sure we're consistent across essentially all of our field operations across the city.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. What about our most, forward staff? I have no doubt that you have a really large operation, and there's supervisors and leads and then field staff. How are you connecting to, your most frontline folks, whether they're in the field now or whether they're home? I mean, how are we, talk through the mechanics of that, because I think it wouldn't be difficult for people to feel disconnected especially if they're frontline and out there by themselves or now stranded at home. Can you talk through some more detail about how that's happening for you?
For me, Casey?
Yes, yeah, go ahead, Mike, sorry.
It's just a requirement to be especially intentional, I think. As much as I can't be in the office as much at our municipal office, I've tried to get down to our parking shops to be able to interact face to face in a way that is, appropriate with social distancing and everything else, and really be in touch through my supervisor and let them know that they are not forgotten. There is a sense for field staff that there are rules. There are the haves and the have-nots, and the haves get to telecommute, and the field staff feel like sometimes they're the have-nots, and it's letting them know that they are doing critical, important work. They will give them the tools they need. We will do everything we can to keep them safe, and that they're essentially just not forgotten. But it's sort of over communicating with them and letting them know they're valued as doing really important, essential work right now for us.
Got it. Thank you. Let's follow that thread a little bit. Mike, maybe you can go, and if there are other folks that want to, chime in. But we're doing things differently, right? Talk about your operation and the things that you're doing now that are different, and what does that mean? Changing people's job functions. I know that there are people that are running parking operations, and now they're in the incident command center. So talk about the adjustment that you're making in some of your duties, what you're doing, what you're not doing now, and what are the ramifications for you and your staff to say, now we're doing something entirely different. Mike, you start here, and then we'll move on to the next participant.
Sure, this is a lot of talking for a quiet person. But I do have staff, so, we've sort of been preparing as a lot of cities do. I have staff who have been trained in incident management, and, I have been the deputy during this incident to people that typically report to me. And it's sort of everybody doing what they can in a time of, essentially of crisis. Everybody has to sort of reprioritize. We talk about, and we'll talk about it more, I'm sure, but when we talk about managing the curve and how we prioritize, it's given us almost an opportunity to really advance that thinking a lot more quickly. I'm sure we'll talk about restaurant loading and things like that, but really to jumpstart a lot of that work and really think in real time how we are prioritizing work, how we are prioritizing the curb in a way that is really sticky and meaningful right now for people.
Got it. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Justin has a comment to share. Go ahead.
Yes, this is from Kim. In Santa Rosa, all parking staff are at home. Our garages are gates up with no staff. No parking enforcement is taking place. While we have not announced free metered parking, we do not have enforcement, and therefore very little revenue coming in.
Kim, do you want to expand on that? Would you like to jump in by audio and share with us if you're able? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Oh, great. Yeah, we are definitely I'm in California, by the way, so we are all, in our Sonoma County has been directed to shelter in place, and I think the city is still struggling with identifying what is considered essential services versus non-essential services. And at this point, it's been determined that parking is non-essential. So as far as staffing, we in our downtown is really quiet. There's very little activity down there anyway, but that's why we made the decision to raise the gates, because we don't have staff, and should there be a problem with the equipment, we wouldn't have anybody to help people get out. So therefore, we've been kind of taking maybe what could be considered an extreme approach, but at this point, home work, admin people are working remotely, and field staff are just home.
Kim, could I ask you? This is Mark Lyons in Florida. Hi.
Hi, Mark.
With those facilities that you've abandoned. The elevators and any of the active systems, critical systems within the facilities, what have you done with those?
Well, the elevators are operating, and should there be a problem with an elevator, the maintenance supervisor would go in to address it. We haven't had any issues with that yet. But yeah, the elevators are functioning, the lighting is functioning.
Is that to say then the maintenance person is a critical function within the facility and they have to stay, available at all times?
Well, I've got 3 people who are exempt management classifications, and so all of us are working remotely, and we're going in and driving through the facilities ourselves just to keep an eye on things. But we're not getting out of the vehicles. We're not interacting with the public, or at least we're keeping our distance if we do. So that's really the only patrols we're doing are management staff going in to keep an eye on things. And so far it's been surprisingly better than we thought in terms of vandalism and graffiti. Homelessness has not been what we had feared.
Great, thank you.
This raises a question. I know in my community there are restaurants that are doing delivery, sort of takeout, that kind of thing. What are cities doing as it relates to opening up space or managing curb space in a different way, especially for those businesses that are providing food and delivery? Anybody?
Hi, Casey. This is Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
This is Dave from Pittsburgh. We're doing the same thing. We're experiencing the same details that Kim is. State is mandated for stay at home, and the mayor issued a suspension of all enforcement throughout the city. So our street meters are non-enforceable. And with that, we're finding out the employees that are coming to town now are parking on the street rather than going into the garage, because we're still fully operational in the garages. But we're seeing a significant decrease, probably around 75–80% from our utilization in the garages. So as far as curb management goes, it's kind of not a free-for-all, but there's still enough spaces because there's not many employees or individuals coming to the downtown area right now. They're all instructed to stay at home for essential personnel.
Thanks, Dave. Staying on the topic of people management, is anyone implementing temperature screening for essential employees? Anyone doing that? And what steps are you taking? And I think part of this is answered, but what steps are you taking to keep employees home? And now there are a lot of orders there, but in the states like mine that do not have such orders in place, how are you dealing with keeping your staff at home? Anyone?
If you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand.
Casey, I'll jump in real quick. This is Quiz again at KU. Just, when this whole thing was kind of starting, our upper administration had sent out spreadsheets to each of the directors on campus, basically finding out who was essential, who was non-essential. Did anybody fall into a category, a high-risk category based on age or health? And we sat down and determined that for all of our staff. So for example, for myself, I was labeled work from home / work on campus. Well, we had probably 75% of our staff parking officers, and it also based on what your job description was as well. If you were put into that category, work from home, there was no ifs, ands, or buts. That's what your category was going to be. So for me, kind of a funny thing, but not funny, but kind of funny. I tried to use my work from home / work from campus category to try to go up and help student housing folks move out. And I was told no, I couldn't do that. So that kind of gives you an example of where I tried to go help another department because I had the work from campus category tagged on me for the first 2 weeks, but I was still told I could not do that. And so that we kind of had some descriptors given initially, sent up to the big dogs, and everybody was supposed to abide by those.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hucking's up next.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the big things that we're doing down here, because unfortunately, normally we deal with hurricanes. So then at that time, everybody gets the essential personnel tag put on them. So now they can't very well come back and say you're no longer essential personnel. So we're using our enforcement staff just to cover safety violations, things like that. And then as Mark had alluded to, one of the other things that we have is we have 2 downtown garages that service a number of residential condominiums and townhouses and things like that. So we've got a large number of people in the garage right now where normally a lot of folks don't. Our beach garages are empty, but our 2 downtown garages are about 50 to 60% filled. So we have to have staff on standby, at least, you know, we're keeping them around as much as we can, because the other thing is, what do you do with these folks if you just send them home? You know, I prefer that if we can keep people on the payroll, even though we're in the same boat as California had mentioned, you know, where there's no money coming into the meters right now. It's something that I prefer to have our staff at least on the payroll and not burning up sick leave, vacation time, or anything else for something that's totally out of their control.
Got it. Thanks, Hal. Mark Lyons, go ahead. I think we need to unmute Mark.
Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. We got you.
I think we've taken an approach to try and maintain our meter parking first and foremost, and not making it mandatory, but still making it available. And we've opened up the parking garages for anyone that would want to use them. As many of you know, we've launched 2 parking districts within this year. So losing the sense of opportunity for the metered parking is really gets me nervous. So I've convinced the city managers that you know, if we want to provide an open space, it would be in the parking garages. And I really don't see us abandoning our garages. We maintain them as well. We do our own facility maintenance. And so should the time come when we're talking about just essential, you know, attending and managing those facilities as an essential function to make sure that all the critical systems are working in the elevators and so forth, and there's no vandalism and, you know, all the other things that we look for. So it's kind of worked out nicely for us. You also asked the question earlier about curbside. I've followed the lead of Dave and Gary and a few others who identified designated spaces on the curb for pickup, whether it's a restaurant or a store that might still be providing service on an on-call basis or whatever they're doing. But we created some really nice sort of flashy racetrack signs to indicate, you know, quick pickup area. And I guess maybe 5 or 6 spaces throughout each block are designated for that purpose. And we're starting to get calls from other restaurants and businesses that they want the same thing. So it's been somewhat effective.
Thanks, Mark. I wasn't clear. Are you operating meters on street or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We are.
So you're enforcing your.
We are not fully enforcing. And, you know, that's tough. You're sort of walking a difficult message to communicate. But we want to leave them operating. If anyone wants to pay, and many are, they understand the need for the revenue, they'll go ahead and pay, whether it's at a machine. Most of them are paying through the mobile app at this point. But, you know, here in downtown, but also out at our beach district, which has just gone silent, all of them are still open and available. Parking garages, though, are free of charge.
Okay. And so Do you mind sharing? This is a very curious thing. Are you generating revenue?
We
on the
are.
street? Okay.
Yeah, not a lot. And of course, we've only got, 1,200 spaces, 1,300 metered spaces, something like that. But we're generating a few $100s in revenue a day right now. And it's surprising because I don't see too many cars out there. But, they come and some people are paying, and that's fine for us. And we feel like that's the position that's responsible for us to take at this point in time, and still try to, adjust and take these changes that are needed without making hard statements that change the state of where we were at. It sort of gives us the best chance to start back up again.
Okay. One more question for you, Mark, and thank you for that detail. That's really helpful. So you're doing some enforcement. Would you talk about what that actually looks like? And are you facing, especially unhappy people that are receiving citations that can't imagine why you would be enforcing in the first place?
We know, Casey, but we are enforcing safety-related issues as well. We're not advertising that we're not enforcing paid parking. So we're just, again, trying that fine line of some level of expectation, but no penalty if you don't go there. 2 weeks ago, our approach was, if you paid the meter and it expired, we're not going to write a ticket. But if you didn't pay at all, we were going to write the ticket. So we've progressed from that point to we're not enforcing it whatsoever, but it still is open for anyone to use. What we're doing with staff, though, is actually we generally have 6 enforcement officers. We're cutting that back to 2 active in the most urban core areas, keeping the lights on, making them visible, and again, focusing on safety-related items since they're not doing time checks or looking at meters and so forth. The others are being allocated into the parking garages and into administrative roles to help, pick up work that wasn't done or was, just waiting to be done. And so it's an all hands-on team effort right now, and our staff is really responding. We may be close, maybe a few days to a week behind a lot of the other states that are going to essential staff only, but the latest word is it's creeping that way right now.
Got it. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Sean McCormick, you had a comment?
Hey, Casey. Yeah. So in San Francisco, we're still doing meter enforcement, and we're doing that primarily to support the curb management of the spaces. Like somebody else said, that the employees are just parking in front of the businesses, and the people that need to pull up and get their pickups aren't able to. So we've probably got 150 officers a day on the street. We're all additional assignments. We're stuffing bags with masks and gloves and stuff for the hospitals. We're cleaning buses because we're a transit division as well. So we're doing a lot of other assignments as well. But we're going to keep the majority of our people here at work. And the other thing we're going to have them do is just start patrolling neighborhoods. We were in the process of redesigning all of our beats. So we're going to hand out all of these beat assignments and have them go out and just patrol them without any enforcement to determine whether or not they're too big or too small. So it gives us a chance to do something productive at the same time and give a presence to the community that the city is still in the area doing something, even if it's not any enforcement for the most part. We're enforcing safety violations and meters right now. We stopped everything else with the exception of that.
Okay. Sean, you look really sharp. I just want to say that.
Somebody's got to come to work.
I'm telling you. So a couple questions for you. It sounds like the determination of essential includes your team. And is that accurate? Because I know California has some of the strictest restrictions right now, most prohibitive restrictions. So you're considered for your jurisdiction essential. That's accurate? Yes. Yeah,
the unions are trying to fight against some of that because obviously I don't really need everybody. I mean, this is one of those disasters that you don't need as many people as you have available. But so we're trying to find ways to put them to something that's somewhat productive. You know, we're covering testing centers, so we're managing traffic flow through the testing centers just to keep people active. We're putting more people there than we need just to give them some sense of purpose. But we determine whether or not they're essential or not. The state doesn't. So we made a determination that normally in an emergency, we fall under the police department, even though we're separate from the police department. We would naturally go into essential services for the police department in a normal incident like this.
Okay, and just one other question for you. I think what I heard you say is slightly different than Mark in Sarasota, who is enforcing fire, life, and safety. That's not true for San Francisco. You're expanded beyond that. So space management, you're enforcing for that as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, we are doing meter enforcement. We've dropped our meter rates to the statutory minimum, so that's already been done across the board. By the end of the week, we will have removed all time limits on meters, so that way you can pay for the whole day for like $3. So there's no reason really not to have been paying the meters. But but we are still issuing meter violations, although it's not that many, a couple hundred a day, down from several thousand. So.
Okay. And so maybe the question for you that I asked Mark was, you know, are you doing anything differently because people might be complaining that they're getting a non-public safety related parking citation? Is it communication? I guess what I'm looking for is there something different that we're telling people now if you're choosing to enforce for more than just public safety violations?
So we're trying to get that message out of why we're doing what we're doing. It's probably not going out as well as we like, but it's a challenge, and it's even a challenge internally amongst the staff because we don't have a lot of access to gloves and masks and all that stuff because it's all going to the hospitals, and we're like the third tier to get to it. So, I mean, we're finding gloves in the market on our own. We can't order hand sanitizers for our people because it's just not available. So we're still going out there and struggling with that as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
appreciate
guys.
that. Benito in DC, let's take your comment next, please.
Benito wrote, where is revenue coming from? Meters, ? Garage spaces, ? What about cities managing revenue when it comes to pickup zones for deliveries / takeouts? Any thoughts on that now or into the future, especially when cities may ask for demand to see that this program is more permanent?
So a really good segue to how we're managing revenue streams. There's a handful of questions that are relating to that one we can get to in this topic. Anybody want to take a stab at Benito's question?
Okay, Casey, I'll take a stab at it. He's correct. We saw a significant decrease in our meter operation revenue and our garage revenues. And basically, that's over 90% of our annual revenues. So what we're doing now is going back through the budget, eliminating any expense items that we can reduce because we don't know when this is going to change. And what the mayor has encouraged all the authorities in cities to do is to, when like enforcement has been suspended citywide. So they're no longer here, they're at home, but he wants us to continue to keep them on the payroll. So it's doubling our problem with revenues not coming in, and he wants us to continue as long as possible to keep employees on the payroll. So our options are just to go back to the budget and look where we can reduce expenses that are, going away because of our operations or have been limited.
Okay. Let's take Scott from Montgomery County. Scott, go ahead.
Sorry, John, wanted to unmute myself there. Yes, as far as our operations are going to are going right now, and it really needs to be stated that it's a right now thing. We're evaluating this almost daily. We are continuing to collect revenues from our parking facilities, from our streets, and we are continuing to issue citations. However, we are only issuing citations on safety-related violations, and also in that curbside management area where we have that pickup drop-off for restaurants. We're giving a very generous grace period on our mark mode to make sure that people are turning over those spaces. We have situations where employees of those businesses are parking their personal vehicles in those zones and making them not available for that entire block face to use. That's been a challenge for us because of the pushback. People claiming to be getting tickets in this manner, and with the fervor of social media, we've been working very hard at trying to stay ahead of the message of what services we're providing as an essential means of continuing traffic flow, continuing to maintain those basic services. But it continues to be a situation where we're examining it constantly.
Thanks, Scott. You said in your comment that you're selling monthly contract permits and you're continuing to require payment in parking lots. So just want to confirm that that's happening. And I'm interested, do you have business there? Are you selling,
We do, and we may be special because of our position north of Washington, D.C. We still have, even though the governor has identified, only essential businesses should be operating, that still covers a very broad range of the businesses that are working within our 3 parking lot districts and our 20,000 spaces. So we continue to have people that are interested in those discount permit programs, so long as we continue to offer the free parking. We have modified some of our facilities. We've chosen 2 garages, one in one PLD, one in another PLD. These are 1,000-space facilities and a 600-space facility that we're allowing to be free to park in. This is in response to residents who don't normally have to worry about a parking citation in the streets or have a need to store their vehicles. We were responding to that need to provide a little bit of off-street parking, a little relief, again, towards those businesses, which are shifting much more into that curbside program.
Okay, thank you. How are people handling, so back still on the topic of contract parking, are people being requested to issue refunds, or are you just suspending these leases? How are people dealing with that? Anyone?
Go ahead, Mark.
Fire away, young man.
That must be me.
Let's
I'll go after Mark.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
We don't have a lot of reserve parking per se. Actually, our largest permit group are employees in downtown, and we have a very low cost program for them. But what we're doing right now, of course, is suspending any of those programs per se, the renewal periods and restrictions and so forth, because the garages are open. But what we are seriously considering when we return to normal, whenever that might be, is giving them 2 or 3 months of free access, just to provide a little bit of goodwill and encourage them to come back. Many times they don't need much of an excuse to say, I don't want to work down there or out at the island because it's too much trouble. So we're kind of taking that route. It's not a huge profit center anyway.
Okay. Thank you. Gary Means.
Hey, sorry I joined everybody late. I've tried really hard during this period of time to find the policies that we can keep going but alter so that we're not really straying a long way away from what the goals of programs are. And so, like from the meters, going back to previous question, I really tried to emphasize, and we stuck with, rather than easing the enforcement, we went to free at the meters and 2-hour enforcement. The thought being, we're trying to give a break to everybody, but we don't want people staying there all day long, because then that may then negatively impact the very businesses that we're trying to help with this. So we stuck with meter enforcement as well as all the safety. Related to this monthly parking or permit question, again, I'm trying to stick with a policy that we would have had in place no matter what. If you want to cancel for April, you can cancel for April. We're typically month to month, right, in most of our permitting programs. If everything swings back strong and fast and hard, I might not be able to guarantee you can get back into a facility if you cancel. But that's an option, just like it would have been in November. If you don't want to park with us in April because of this, then you can cancel, and we're not going to require payment. We're not doing any reimbursements for March, and that's pretty much the way we're going to do it. We can really stick with the same rules that were already in place as it pertains to monthly parking. Then, I'm not saying we won't reduce transient rates in the facilities. We're thinking about that, but for right now, we've maintained regular rates. And your question to somebody else about the level of business, we're probably only like 10% of where we were in transient revenue, but there is some business going on. So there are people out and about, similar to some of the other, I think what Scott was saying. So that's my perspective.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. I want to circle back to Tina. She had a comment a bit ago. So Tina, if you're on and you can remember what we were talking about at the time, I'd like you to jump in if you could.
Okay. I was just going to ask San Francisco, good morning, everybody. Ask San Francisco what they're doing, if there's been any modification to their public garages. We're kind of winging it in Stockton. We're still deemed essential as well. And so our parking operations have consolidated a bit. Garages that we found had very few hourly parkers. We shut the gates, and we're just leaving them available for monthlies, because we too are a heavy staff employee driven downtown. And so that's the core of who is in our parking garages. Unfortunately for us, we're starting to have mechanical issues with the gates because we've got old equipment and it wasn't designed to go up and down as often. So we're going to have to take a look at just what our next steps are. But just curious as to what San Francisco is doing. I'm terrified to open the gates on ours that will end up with homeless encampments and no-gooders, as I call them, doing damage to the facilities. So just thoughts on that.
Thanks, Tina. Glad you're here. So if I can call on Sean to jump in here. Sean McCormick. Hopefully he's still on.
He is. Sean, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Well, Tina, let's suspend that question for just a second, okay? And we'll try to raise Sean and get your answer. But you're raising a good point, and there are a lot of people on the call that are interested in maintenance, right? How do we keep going? Maintenance, cleaning, servicing equipment. How are people doing those things? Are they just suspending them altogether, or have they come up with some creative way to continue those functions? Anyone want to chime in there? Maintenance of facilities and equipment, asset management. That's our topic now. And we may have Tina drive to San Francisco to find out how Sean's doing. So.
All right, we have Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, Tina, we're just shifting some of our staff over to those areas. And while we're not expecting the world out of them, all hands on deck will help out. We can get something accomplished. We're not looking for them to build walls or, tear down walls or anything, but there's a lot of joints and windows and things to clean up, and everyone can still be part of this whole process if they're here. And so that's what we're doing. We're just shifting our staff into those areas and taking care of those things. Anything more complicated, we generally use an outside vendor, and those services are still available to us. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Mark. Kim, you said your maintenance staff, your in-house staff are at home, but your contracted sweepers and janitors are still functioning. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've got an outside janitorial crew. They're continuing to operate, as is our sweeping vendor. I presume they're making their own decisions with their staff on determining that they're essential. We're also working to control security firm to patrol our garages while we're not using our own staff. So I'm hoping to get that in place soon. I know for me personally, and I'd love to hear this from others who are in the shelter-in-place situation, I don't personally have a real clear understanding of what the criteria is in terms of steps that employees could take to ensure their own safety and be able to do some basic work. So, I'm struggling with our direction so far has been everybody's staying home. I think we're erring very, very hard on keep maintaining employee safety, which is great. But I also wonder if there is some middle ground where we can lay out some specific safety steps that employees would use. For example, everybody wears gloves, everybody wears a mask, everybody has access to sanitizing materials, and then they could go out and maybe I could still have my staff come in and drive cars and do a mobile patrol of our facilities where they're not engaging with the public. That to me seems like something that could be done, but that hasn't been clear in our city yet. I'm wondering if other cities have got some specific criteria which is allowing employees to come in to at least do the bare essential services.
Great question, Kim. So the topic is really about the guidance that cities leaders are providing or not providing, and how essential functions, if those are defined, can continue. Anyone want to jump in here? That's a great question.
I've got some input, but I think this is probably always going to be a case-by-case basis based on what the local government's asking you to do. But I think what we're seeing, at least in the Kentucky area, is that things that are closed are mostly public-facing interactions. So while we closed our customer service to walk-in business, we're still trying to maintain maintenance and all the other work that we would do. Besides some of those basic things that people have already mentioned, frequent hand washing and gloves and that, we're saying nobody ride in a vehicle together. So even if two people needed to get to a place to do something, we want them to go in separate vehicles. So that's just another way we've implemented it. They had a break room. We created 2 break rooms, and we're limiting the number of people in the break room at the same time, things like that. So that's just a little bit of what we're doing.
But Gary, I think one of the things that might be essential is, have you gotten guidance on, and you maybe covered this before, but who's essential and who's not essential, or what duties are essential? It would seem like it starts the conversation about who's doing what and then how you can best protect them starts with a determination as to what's essential and what is not essential. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I think that's a legitimate question, and I don't really have input on it because we haven't been really forced to think that way just yet here in Lexington.
Okay. But you have continuity of business plans, I'm guessing that, whether it's a weather event or otherwise, that there's some discussion about essential duties and non-essential duties, or essential personnel, non-essential personnel, right? Are you looking to those documents for guidance?
Right. Well, I think what it's a little different in our business in that, I guess we should separate on-street from facilities, but if you are still allowing people in your facility, then I believe it's essential that you keep it safe, you keep it clean, you keep obstructions out of the way. You don't want the homeless to take over, as somebody mentioned before. So, I think if I'm allowed to interpret it locally, and so far I'm seeing most of our functions as essential. We're trying to be flexible with employees if they've got childcare issues. We're doing some rotation. My own internal staff at the parking authority itself, we're on a rotation basis where one person only is in the office every day. But in terms of out in the facilities, if we're open, then I think it's essential that we provide some level of safety and service, as long as we're allowed to be open and not, lock them down.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And circling back to Kim in Santa Rosa, it seemed, I don't know the details of it, but I imagine California's, got some of the strictest, limitations, right? So it's curious to me that your city hasn't given you guidance on what's essential, what's not essential.
So I wouldn't say that I may have mischaracterized that. We have an emergency action plan in place, and we did that in response to the fires that we had to deal with. And what's interesting is that when we came up with that plan, parking was considered a tier 2 essential service, but this was not an emergency that any of us anticipated. And in this situation, parking is not considered to be a tier 2 essential service. I think more where I was going with this is that the criteria, I guess the employee protection standard operating procedure, maybe that would be a better way of putting it, is something that has not been formulated for this particular crisis. And so I think that's one reason why we're kind of on such severe lockdown. And I mean, I understand it. It's interesting to hear about San Francisco and they're out writing tickets and they don't really have protective gear. That's a kind of a fine line to walk. I would love to have my enforcement staff out just dealing with safety issues, but I want them to be safe. And if we can't provide them with any, if all the gloves are being redirected to other purposes for medical facilities or other issues, it doesn't, I struggle with having enforcement staff go out when they can't really adequately protect themselves.
Got it. Well, and part of what piqued my interest in what Gary was talking about is this, one person in a vehicle, 2 break rooms, 1 person in the office. Those are the kinds of steps, it seems like that at least Lexington is taking. But maybe some of those and if we could figure out a way to disseminate that information beyond this Shoptalk now, so that people got an idea, okay, that's what they're doing in Lexington. That sounds like some reasonable steps to reduce risk while keeping some functions going. That's interesting to me. And maybe that can be something that we work on. Jay Clay had a question. This is has anyone considered staggering schedules for employees who still report in person to prevent spread to anyone at once if a facility were to become infected? For example, week 1 team and week 2 team that rotates. You want to add anything to that, or anyone want to take up that? It's kind of along the lines of what Gary was talking about, giving a little bit of detail about that. Anyone have other strategies for staggering schedules that they'd like to share that would be helpful?
Mark has raised his hand.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark.
In regard to staggering schedules, I know some of the others are actually doing it now. We're planning to do that if we get into a more critical condition. And speaking of that term critical, as we were talking a couple minutes ago about essential functions and how you define essential functions, I actually had an email from our HR director who provided their definition of, well, instead of essential, we're calling it critical because we believe everybody's essential to our function, right? But critical nature is, so I wanted to comment about that. And I'll just share that if I can real quick. And their belief and definition on that is anyone that has to come on site to perform critical functions for our citizens, and that would generally be defined as anyone involved with public safety, policing, fire, water, wastewater, and other personnel that are critical to the public works, sanitation, and highway functions. So, you know, I'm like Gary. I see us, because of our facilities and the type of services we have and the safety systems, I see those as critical. Now, what we have to do, I believe, is try to mitigate our interaction with human beings. And so, again, this is one of the reasons why we immediately thought, put our gates up so that when there is a credit card issue or a problem with a ticket, the attendant doesn't have to be at the exit gate trying to manage fumbling with the ticket or talking to the customer or whatever it might be. And but I see us as a critical part of the infrastructure in downtown, and I'll continue to push for doing that. Now, we had overlapping shifts previously that allowed us to perform more work. We've separated those, and we're only doing back-to-back shifts out in those garages, with the exception of the transferring, you know, the reallocation of staff to do additional services, and then we're making sure that we're having, you know, proper distancing, social distancing, and I want to propose to everybody we call it physical distancing, not social distancing. There's a, you know, a real distinction there that I think makes a lot of difference in how we move forward. But anyway, that was my comment about the critical and essential functions and how we manage that. So, thank you.
All right, Casey, we have time for one last comment. I think we should do Wen. He's had his hand up for a while. Wen.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Wayne.
Hi, everyone. This is Win Forbes Marketing. So we learned something from the city of Santa Monica, essentially that they're working together with the council. Initially, the council says, let's close off all, just so that parking is not blocking the way for the social distancing and everything. But then they were able to work together to ensure, while that has been taken care of by creating keeping and creating new grace period for people so that when they need to go to grocery and so on, they can still use the infrastructures for free. They're letting all the majority of the locations functioning, both on-street and off-street, as normal. On one hand, to make sure the hygiene and everything is taken care of, the liability of the locations are taken care of. But on the other hand, the revenue is not just being forego like immediately, automatically from the city's standpoint. They're operating on kind of sort of a daily basis, communicating, but one point they make was there are granular ways of making this work instead of just cookie cutter everything, just cut it off. So that's kind of sort of some of the examples they shared with us, thought to share here. They did close, absolutely. They did close 3 locations nearby a public library, a senior hospitality facility, as well as a restaurant concentrated area. But they still kept those 3 locations available for the monthly parkers nearby if they needed to use it for their essential business purposes. So it's basically not open to the public, but kept it for the monthly parkers.
I think, you know, what you said in there about not a, you know, cookie cutter or like one solution for everything is really pretty powerful. That if you can think through, okay, this is why we would keep this facility open versus, you know, the risk that this facility, includes. That's, you know, something that I hadn't really heard, that sort of level of granular kind of decision making. So thanks. I don't know if Santa Monica's on, but definitely sounds like something interesting there that's going on.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone who participated today. A special thank you to Casey for moderating for our discussion. This concludes today's Shop Talk. I would like to invite everyone to continue this conversation in the IPMI's forum at forum.parking-mobility.org. We invite everyone to join us again on March 31st at 12 p.m. for our next COVID-specific Shop Talk moderated by Kim Jackson. Today's Shop Talk is copyrighted in 2020 by the International Parking and Mobility Institute with all rights reserved. You may now disconnect. Thank you.
Be safe, everyone. Thank you.